Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next module. Today, we are going to cover the idea of a phased closing. We're going to talk about what that is, why we use them, how they're structured, and all the ins and outs. So these are deals that we put together that are structured a little bit differently than our normal deals that we've talked about in previous modules. So let's dive in. Let's just talk about phased closing. First of all, what is a phased closing? Oh, and before we continue on, I should mention that we on the line have the illustrious Cody Bugan with us. Say hello, Cody.
Hey everyone. Hey, and I might Dave knows this stuff in and out probably better than I do. So I might be completely quiet on this particular recording, but who knows? Me, I'll pipe in here or there. But anyways, good stuff. Very important to know. Look forward to it, Dave.
Yeah, and I'm sure you will pipe in. So phase closing. Let's talk about what a phase closing is. So the idea here, guys, is in our typical deal. You know, we've talked about this in the past. You put an agreement together. Let's call it. We love this example. It's our 10-acre, 60-lot deal, and we are going to close on that at the 60 days after our final civil approval. And when we close on that deal, we are closing on the entire project, meaning that we are taking the entire property and we're going to divide that into 60 lots and bring all 60 of those lots to market at the same time. So let's talk about phased closings. A phased closing is when you have a deal that, for various reasons that we'll get into, you deem that it is too big to bring to market all at one time. And we can continue to use our 10-acre, 60-lot project as an example, but that is what a phase closing is. You're taking a project and you are dividing it into phases, and that you will only close on one phase at a time. So if you have a 100-lot deal and you're paying $9 million for it, and you split that thing into 3 equal phases, and we'll get into this more because it's pretty rare that you'll have equal phases, but just for the sake of simplicity as we get started here, you split that into 3 equal phases, then what will happen is that you will, on the closing of phase 1, you will not pay $9 million. You will pay a third of that. So you'll pay $3 million. And then you will build out that phase 1, get those lots sold, and then you will move on to phase 2, and you'll close on phase 2 at 3 million, build that one out, get it sold, and then close on phase 3. So it's just a way, basically, of pushing out closing on certain portions of this project, typically because the project is too big to close all at once in terms of where the market handle that many lots coming online at the same time. So that is the basic idea of a phased closing. And what I want to talk about now is a term called absorption rate. And this is oftentimes the term we use when we are determining if we need a phase closing or not. So what is absorption rate? Well, absorption rate is most commonly used in real estate, and it is used to evaluate the rate at which available homes are sold in a specific market during a given time period. And oftentimes, this time period is measured in 12-month increments. So again, what that means is that you're taking your entire lot count of your project and you're trying to figure out how many lots here can I realistically bring to market and get sold in a year, in that 12-month time. All right, so that is absorption rate, and it's an important component when we're trying to figure out if we need to phase this project or not. And so the goal here is to determine how many homes can be sold in a 12-month period. That's your absorption rate. And what we want to do is talk about some of the techniques that we can use to determine your absorption rates. So what we want to do is determine, hey, I've got this project. How many homes can I realistically get sold, or how many lots can I get sold in a 12-month period? And one of the ways that you can get an idea of what that absorption rate is for any given market is through your realtor contacts. Again, we've talked in previous modules of what real estate agents are and are not good for, and they just happen to be very good at knowing homes. And so oftentimes a real estate agent will be able to give you some good feedback in terms of absorption rate, in terms of how many homes can be sold in any given market in a 12-month increment. Your developer contacts are also a very good way of getting an idea of what absorption rate is. You can, as you build these networks with your developers, you can get on the phone with a couple of them and say, hey, in X market, if you had a project that was 100 lots, would you want that phased? And if so, how many lots do you think you could take down per 12-month period? And so between those two, you'll start to get a good idea of what absorption rate is in whatever market that you're looking at. So
Dave,
again,
and also,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt, and also title companies. Title companies have a lot
yeah,
of data available to them where they can get you, stats on absorptions. But anyways, yeah, I mean, here again, Dave, you're back to this, our network, and you got to build that network. So, anyways, I bumped in there,
that's
but
right.
yeah,
That's exactly
title
right.
companies.
Yeah. So let's take an example. Let's take for example that we have a project that's going to yield 100 lots, and through our contacts and networking and studies, we determined that the absorption rate for this given market is 25 homes per year. So what that does for us is it tells us, okay, if we bring 100 lots to market at one time, we're going to end up with a problem. We're going to have too many lots that are going to sit there and go unsold. Or if we're looking to sell these lots to a home builder is not going to want to buy all 100 of them because they're not going to be able to get 100 homes built and sold quickly. It's going to be a years long project for them, and they don't want to pay for something before they actually can get going on building on it. So the outcome here in this example will be a 4-phased closing, 25 lots per year over a 100-lot project. And so that is basically what we have for phase closing. Now, Cody, I will ask you to pipe in here because I know that when you have projects with different product types, let's say, for example, you've got a project that's going to yield 100 townhome lots, but only 50 detached lots. So we have two types of product. Do we include the same absorption rates for both of those?
Good question. So, when Dave's talking about these 4 phases for this 100 lot project, a real simple way to look at that is basically you're taking one piece of property and you're kind of turning it into 4 separate projects. Okay, which is a real simple way to look at it. But as far as product types, that's often and very commonly a way to get a particular piece of property or project absorbed at a faster pace for a few reasons. One is if I'm a builder and I'm going in and building this project, I only want to build houses that are at the same price point. I only want to build so many of them at a time because I got to be careful I don't compete with myself, right? So I don't want to have them deciding on which one of my houses they're going to buy because I have so many of them. And then so I'm basically competing against myself. So you want to keep your inventory in line with, the demand. So, but what happens is let's say you do some bigger lots, some medium sized lots, and some, townhouse lots, attached housing, still single family, but attached. Each price point or product type should have its own absorption calculation or data. So a townhouse buyer, let's just use throw some numbers out. Okay, let's just say the townhouse buyer, the townhouses are 300,000, or yeah, let's just say they're 300,000 is what the townhouses are, and then the bigger estate lots, are, let's just say they're 10,000 foot lots. Those homes are 800,000 or 900,000, and then the mediums are 6. So you got a 300,000 price point, a 600 and 900. Well, you have different buyers in each one of those pools. And so I could go build vertical product houses, homes in all three of those price points within the same project and be absorbing in three different areas of the market. And so I'm getting through that project quicker without competing with myself because I basically have three product types. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great.
The other thing to keep in mind is when Dave's talking about this absorption is, you know, you guys have concluded in this example that this project will absorb at 25 a year. And understand when you're calculating that absorption, you're figuring out what your project will absorb. You're looking at the overall market that you're in, wherever area of town it is. And you're looking at what the overall absorption is for that market at whatever product type you're building and price point. And then you're also taking into account existing projects or upcoming projects in that marketplace that are also going to compete for that absorption to where, and then you come out to a net effect of how much more inventory is needed for that marketplace in order to meet the absorption numbers that that market demands. Does that make sense? That
Mhm.
so so I just want to make sure you're always taking into account what's going on around you when you're calculating absorption.
Yeah. So that is a phased closing. That's the principle behind the idea. So let's talk about pricing, the pricing structure, because you're putting these deals together with property owners. And so you need to kind of figure out, hey, how am I going to structure the pricing? I might know what the project as a whole is worth, but how do I know how much to pay for each of these phases? And it's pretty simple. The idea here is that you, first of all, you want to determine your total number of lots. And then you will, throughout the course of your approval process, you will delineate your phases. And we've used delineate before just to make sure to check your understanding. We've talked about delineating wetlands in the past. And to delineate basically is just to indicate the exact position of a border or boundary. So you're basically, to delineate is just to draw a line. And so when we say delineate the phases, we're just saying we need to draw our line around each phase. And in doing so, we will know how many lots are contained within each phase. So once we've delineated the project and we determine the number of lots in each phase, we then can determine the cost per lot. And that just is basic math of dividing the total purchase price by the total number of lots. And so the closing price for each phase will be determined by multiplying the number of lots in that phase by the per lot cost. And that is how we determine the cost of each phase. And the last phase obviously will be, the math should always work out, but it's basically the final phase is just the leftover balance, the unpaid balance. So we would take everything that we've paid in the previous phases, add it all up, and then subtract that number out of our total purchase price. And that will be that remaining balance that gets paid for the final phase. And so just to make it clear, so you guys understand, not all phases are created equal, right? Oftentimes your first phase will be your most expensive phase because in that first phase there's certain infrastructure that you have to construct in order to be able to build those homes. Let's take many jurisdictions will have, many markets will have stormwater treatment facilities on site, right? We call them stormwater ponds. You see them a lot in various parts of the country. But that stormwater pond will be built and sized to take in the stormwater from the entire project. Even if it's a 4-phase project, for example, we'll build that stormwater pond once and it will absorb all the stormwater for all 4 phases. But in our first phase, we still have to build that same sized stormwater pond, and it'll be oversized for our phase 1, but it's just a cost that we're going to have to build out because we need it in place just to be able to do phase 1. So the phase 1 oftentimes is going to be your most expensive phase, especially in terms of the construction. And the point here is that not all phases will be exactly the same. You won't have the exact same number of lots per phase. You might not have the exact same amount of infrastructure that you have to build out per phase. So I just want you to keep that principle in mind. But that's how we determine the cost of phases. Now let's talk about closing structure. How do we close these different phases? How do we structure the closing terms? And again, there are many ways to do this. We're going to look at one of the most common ways here today, and that is phasing these closings out on a 12-month in 12-month increments. And so if we use, for example, a 3-phase project, we have a project we're putting together and we're going to break it down into 3 phases. Well, we could say that our phase 1 will close at what we've seen before in closing examples. It'll close at 60 days after final civil approval or 12 months following the contingency date. So again, we run our project through our feasibility, we get through land use approval, and we get through civil approval for that phase. And 60 days after we get civil approval on phase 1, we close on phase 1. Phase 2, oftentimes we'll structure it similar, where we will close 60 days after final civil approval or 12 months, but those 12 months are following the phase 1 closing. So it's 12 months later. It's 12 months after we've closed on phase 1. So we have 12 months to get our final civil done, and we close on phase 2 at that point. Phase 3, again, the same idea. We're going to close 60 days after final civil approval or 12 months following the phase 2 closing. So again, you can see what we're doing here. We're just structuring our different phases, our closing of our different phases to occur in 12-month increments. So we close on phase 1, and then 1 year later, we close on phase 2, and then 1 year after that, we close on phase 3. So that's a common structure for closing on a phased project. The next thing we want to think about is earnest money, because we're going to look at this a little bit differently than our normal deals. Well, actually, it's similar, but you'll see what I'm saying here. So when we're paying out earnest money in your typical deal, your earnest money goes into escrow. It sits there until closing, and then it is applied to the purchase price at closing. Well, in a phase deal, you've got, let's say, use our example of a 3-phase project, you've got 3 different closing dates. And so the earnest money, the question comes up is, well, where does that earnest money get applied to? When does it get applied? And your goal, guys, is that you want to have in your agreements, you want to have it structured to where your earnest money payments are always applied to your phase 1 closing. So when you close on phase 1, any earnest money that you've paid up until that point is applied to that closing. And Cody, maybe you can talk about, chime in here on the reason why we like to have our earnest money applied to phase 1, as opposed to, let's say, for example, sharing it out
a third.
closing, in thirds in a 3-phase example.
Yeah. So I mean, the biggest reason for this is, when you go as a developer and you're going to close on the land and build the subdivision, develop it, most of the time, at least we do, we go get what's called A&D loans, or acquisition and development loans, from a bank, from an institutional lender. And they'll loan you a certain percentage of cost or a certain percentage of value, a lot of times whichever is less. Okay, so they might loan you, 80% of cost, or 70% of value, whichever is less. Okay, well, and even a lot of times don't even look at value anymore, because the cost number is always less, and so it's 75% of cost. Well, you want your earnest money you've put out, that's considered equity. That's considered, you want to use that as part of your down payment for your loan. So if you have all that earnest money applied to phase 1, now that means that's less cash you have to bring to closing in order to close on that land and develop the property. So that's the simplest and most important reason why you want to get all of your earnest money applied to phase 1. And then, because then what happens is then you can take some of your profit from phase one and roll that into phase two as equity, and then two into three. So, and I think for the most part, this sellers will allow this. Not always. I mean, not if they're real savvy, but I don't think if it gets applied a third to each phase, I don't think that's a deal killer. But getting it all applied to the first phase is definitely something that you can pull off a lot of times, and it is valuable to you as far as down payment needed for your loan. And here again, guys, with this course, Land Deals Revealed, we're all about getting out of deals and not taking on the development risk. But you still got to think about the developer. You got to think as if you are the developer, because the developer is your buyer. If you don't think about your buyer, you're not going to see the type of returns that we're coaching you how to achieve. You have to think as if you are the developer.
That's right. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thanks for that, Cody. So the next thing we want to talk about, guys, is extensions. When we're talking about our extensions, you know that is what we put into place to be able to extend out closing. But how do extensions work when we have 3 different phases? And so for extensions, what we want to do is we want to, if for example, and we use our common extension language, which is we typically go for 3 60-day extensions. Well, we want to be able to apply those 3 60-day extensions to each and any of our 3 phases. And so if we need to extend out phase 1, we will have up to 3 extensions of 60 days available to us. And we can use all 3 of those. If we get to phase 2 and need to extend that one out, just because we used extensions in phase 1 does not mean that we won't have these extensions available to us in phase 2. So again, we want to have our extensions available to us not in just one go, but in each and every phase as we get to closing. We want to be able to exercise those extensions in all the phases or in only some of the phases, but we want to have that option. So that is extensions. Now, we like to make sure we check your understanding. So let's go on to an example, and we'll use our classic example of a 10-acre lot, 10-acre parcel, and it is going to yield 60 lots. And we're going to say that the raw lot value is $20,000 each. So our offer to the property owner, our purchase price will be $1.2 million. And let's say that we agree to pay 5% in earnest money, so a total of $60,000. And let's also say that we set up our extension language to allow us up to 3 60-day extensions. And again, we can use those extensions on each and every phase. And now let's say that we determine that the absorption rate is right around 25 homes per year. So at a 60 lot project, we're going to set up a 3-phase closing in our agreement. So during our engineering phase where we're working through our land use approvals, at some point in there, we will delineate our project into 3 sections, so 3 phases. And let's imagine that in our first phase, we determined that we're going to delineate out 18 lots. So at the closing of phase 1, the owner is going to be paid an amount equal to 18 lots times $20,000, which is $360,000. However, remember that on this first phase, this phase 1 closing, the 60 grand that we paid in earnest money, here, if we structured our agreement correctly, it's going to be, all of it is going to be applied to that $360,000 closing. So we will actually come to the table and pay $300,000. So 360 minus our already paid 60 grand in earnest money. Now, let's imagine that in phase 2, it contains 20 lots. So in our example of our closing structure, we're going to close phase 2. We're going to close at 12 months after the closing on phase 1. And the purchase price will be 20 lots times 20,000 each, which is 400,000. And for the third phase, the third and final phase, we're going to close 12 months after the phase 2 closing. And here we will pay the balance, right? So we've already paid 360 on phase 1. We've paid $400,000 for phase 2, so that's a total of $760,000 paid out already. So the remaining amount that we will have to pay at the closing of phase 3 is that 1.2 million minus 760, which is $440,000. So that is an example of how these phases play out in our agreements, and they become important, especially when you start going after some of these larger projects. If you put together, for example, a 200 lot project in a market that cannot absorb that many new homes coming online at one time, you absolutely need to be thinking of a phased closing. And knowing that you need to be thinking in that direction, it will help you manage your conversations with your property owners and make sure that their expectations are managed as well. And you're able to explain to them clearly why you can't just close, using our example, at $1.2 million all in one go. Because if I bring 60 homes onto this small market in one go, I'm going to have difficulty getting those homes sold because the absorption rate around here is about 25 homes per year. So that's it. So those are phase closings. Maybe before we close out, I know that we've had some experience, Cody, in the past where we've actually put together a phased closing with a property owner, but in our buyer being a national, we've actually gotten those things sold all at once. Can you talk to us a little bit maybe about your experience in that?
Yeah. So in a previous module, Dave, we did a little illustration where you picked that we were selling or that we were getting paid at land use approval. And so a recent deal we did, our contract was a 3-phase closing. We close 60 days after final civil engineering approval or construction drawing approval. And phase 2 is 1 year after phase 1, and phase 3 is 1 year after phase 2. Okay. So we technically could have closed this thing over a 3-year period or actually a 2-year period, I guess, from phase 1 to phase 3. Well, the buyer that I hooked up, I was able to get a deal done with them where they're closing at land use approval. So, which is entitlements, or preliminary plat approval. So, and here's the thing is that if you're closing at land use approval, 9 times out of 10, you're closing the whole thing at once. And so what we did is, even though I had a 3-phase closing, we're actually closing with the seller all in one fell swoop because the buyer I hooked up is closing everything at land use approval all in one chunk. Now, and that is not to be misleading. I don't think my buyer is going to end up developing the thing all at once. I still think they're probably going to develop it in 2 phases, maybe 3, more likely 2. But because I hooked them up at land use approval, because you can't get a land use approval in phases, you get the whole thing, you get land use approval all at once for the whole project. You just do a lot of times your construction drawings you do in phases. So because I'm delivering land use approval on the whole thing at once, which is really most commonly the only way to do it, they're closing with us all at once. We're closing with the seller all at once, which we're going to have a happy seller because he's getting his whole payday all in one fell swoop. So, did that answer your question?
Yep, that's perfect. That's right. So that, guys, is the concept of phase closings. Again, they don't happen every day, but you will have projects where, and this is our hope for you, putting together these big projects. They're a great way to make big money, but they will oftentimes entail the need for a phased closing. So keep that in mind as you work forward on your projects, that you need to be mindful of lot counts and absorption rates, especially in some of the smaller markets that just can't handle big projects coming on all at once. All right, so we will end it here. Thanks, Cody.
Yep, thanks everyone.
Hello, everyone. So we are back with another module, and we're going to let you know right off the bat, this one's going to be short. There's not a whole lot to say about this one, but it is an important concept that we want to make you aware of. And that concept is what we call owner carry. And I've got Cody on the line with us today. Hey, Cody, how you doing?
Good.
So we are going to spend just a couple minutes talking about owner carry and how that can play out in development deals. So, Cody, tell us a little bit about what is an owner carry?
So an owner carry is a way to basically limit your cash into a deal. So if an owner, you basically what you're wanting the owner to do is you want him to carry back part of the purchase price as a note. So let's say that I'm buying a piece of property for $5 million, and I can't. I'm trying to limit my cash into the deal. So when I go to close on that property, and maybe I'm getting an A&D loan, or I have a JV partner or whatever that is putting up $3 million. Well, that means I'm 2 million short. So that means I need another $2 million cash to close on the property and take ownership. I might negotiate what's called an owner carry. So I'm saying, okay, I'm going to pay you 5 million for this property, but at closing, I'm going to give you 3 million, and then you're going to carry back a note that is secured against the property for 2 million. And majority of the time, that note is actually subordinated, meaning that it goes into second position, because whoever I'm getting that 3 million from is in first position as far as security against the property. And then they're going to go in second position behind first position. Does that make sense what subordination is?
Yeah, so the owner will subordinate to, for example, the bank, right? So
Right. Yes.
if something goes south and the property gets sold, the bank is going to be first in line with their handout to get back their 3 million, and then if there's anything left over, the property owner will get the 2.
That's right.
Yep.
And so owner carries, they happen less in a healthy market versus an unhealthy market. Because here again, with Land Deals Revealed, what we're teaching you can be done in any type of market, because it's just whatever you're doing, whatever you're putting deals together at it's relative to that market. So you can do this in a down market or an up market. But because money tightens up substantially in a down market, a lot of times that's where the owner carries come more into play, is in a down market versus an up market. Not to say that it's not done in an up market. The other thing related to that is, when it's done in a down market, sometimes an owner might carry the entire purchase price. That 5 million, they might carry it, subordinate it to whoever's in first position, the bank or private money or whatever it is. They might subordinate the whole 5 million and go in second position, and they get paid off as you sell lots, or as you sell houses or whatever. But it's a way for a deal that otherwise couldn't get done. The owner will subordinate the entire purchase price. And often in deals like that, you're paying, or even just in owner carries in general, a lot of times you might agree to pay them a small interest on that money. And so interest rate, you can or can't pay interest on that carry. Sometimes you might want to throw them a little bit of interest just to make them feel good about it. The other way to structure owner carries is, let's say they really don't want to subordinate, and go in second position. They really want to be paid all at once, but up front, but you can't pull it off. It's just not possible. You don't have the resources available to you, or whatever it may be. You can also do joint ventures with property owners, where they put up the property and you put up, you and your team, your bank, whatever, you guys put up, the knowledge, the project management, and the money needed to build the project. And so they put up the property, you put up everything else. It's a joint venture. We've talked about joint ventures in previous modules where you'll do like you guys will work out some profit split, some equity split. And so, you'll for the owner carrying the purchase price back in second position, that your entity is now the owner of the property. You've agreed to pay them the purchase price as you sell stuff, and also as profit starts coming in, they get a certain cut of the profit as well for carrying the purchase price. So that's my 2 cents on owner carries.
Yeah. And let me ask you this, Cody, because I feel like oftentimes you'll have owners who maybe they're asking too much. They're asking more than what the property is worth. And sometimes they will tease a buyer with a carry option, knowing that they're asking for more than what it's worth. And they'll say, well, I'll carry a portion of it if you want to do the deal. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on those types of situations.
I'm not going to say never, but for the most part, I very rarely have I seen where it makes sense to overpay for a piece of property in return for the owner agreeing to do a carry.
Yeah.
An owner carry is a way to get a deal done from a capital standpoint, but that the purchase price is still in line.
Yeah.
And so I'm not a big fan of trying to figure out how to overpay for something
Yeah.
in return for an owner carry.
Yeah. And guys, you will see that on occasion. You will see property owners who oftentimes they just know flat out they're asking for too much. And in their mind, they feel like offering a carry is a carrot that will catch a buyer on the line. But at the end of the day, you only want to pay what the property is worth. And if a carry requires you to pay more than it's worth, then it just oftentimes, more often than not, just doesn't work out. It doesn't make sense. So again, guys, this was a short one, but we just wanted to make sure that we made you aware that owner carries do happen in these land deals and they can be used. Just make you aware of the concept. So we will end this one here. This is a short one. All right.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care, guys. Hello, everyone. David Hill here with Cody Bugan, and we wanted to take some time in this module to talk about the assignment clause. Now, we've covered the assignment clause in a previous week's module, and we've talked to you about the importance of it. Obviously, as your role as a land acquisition expert and as a wholesaler, you need to make sure that that assignment clause is in place, which will allow you to exit out of your deals in how you see fit. Now, there will be situations where you will get pushback on the assignment clause. And in our previous module, we talked about different ways that you can work around that. But what we want to do today is talk to you about what your options are as a wholesaler if and when you have an assignment clause that just gets completely shut down, where your seller does not want to allow you to assign the agreement. And you've gone back and forth, you've tried all you can to give yourself some wiggle room, but it's just not working out. So let's spend this module, it won't be that long, but let's spend this module talking a little bit about some of our options as wholesalers when our assignment clause does not go the way we would have liked it to. So Cody, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your experience with that.
So my simple answer is, so do where all the money's at anyway, simultaneous closes. We don't often assign deals. I will say back in the day, we did a lot more assigning deals, but I've talked previously, all the money's in simultaneous closes anyways. So fine, shut my assignment clause down. That's fine, because I'm going to simultaneous close it anyways, and no one can do anything about that. Completely legal. I have every right to do it, and no problem. I won't assign it because I'm going to go and make 10 times as much as if I would have assigned it anyways, because I'm going to do it through a simultaneous close. So that's my simple answer. Okay. Simultaneous close, people. I can't talk about it enough. Ninja stuff. Let's get into the big paydays. But if you're just insistent on, you want to get all your money, you want to get some fee right up front. Okay. You're not as, you're looking for some quick hits, some smaller quick hits, and you want to get something tied up and you want to get out of it and get paid. even though your assignment clause is shut down, you can still have, remember I had 1, 2, 3, I had duties, payday, and capital. Okay. Remember the three things and how you can get creative and put together some magical paydays for you. So let's say you don't want to do any duties beyond just doing the land acquisition. And then you also want your payday right at the beginning at land acquisition. And the third part doesn't even matter because you don't need any capital to do that. Well, the problem is you couldn't get an assignment clause into your contract. It was absolutely a deal killer. That's okay. You can still do no duties, get paid right up front, a smaller finder's fee. And the key is you're still going to have to do a simultaneous close. So you don't have the rights to turn that contract over to your buyer. So your buyer and you are going to have an agreement. What's going to have to be dealt with in your agreement is they'll go ahead and pay you up front, but you guys are still going to have to perform what's called the simultaneous close. Okay. Also, I should say that in all my years, our assignment clause has never been completely shut down.
That's right.
We've always been able to find variations of the language that's written in our in our assignment clause for the seller to get comfortable. A lot of times they will say, we'll try to get it where, it says we can't assign it. Sometimes we can assign it, but not without the seller's consent or approval, which won't be unreasonably withheld. Sometimes we'll put that in there. But if I'm putting that in there, I'm putting in some other language where I don't need to deal with the seller's approval. And it might be that it says that, myself or my company is somehow in a authoritarian or management role with the entity that we assign it to. Right. And so it's somewhat gray, vague language to where I might take on some type of responsibility or role within the entity I assigned it to. Because you got to know that most developers will create a separate company or LLC for each project for liability reasons. So it might be that I have to have some type of ownership in that entity I assigned to. So we've done it where, okay, fine, the entity I assigned it to, it's a new entity just for that project, and I have a 10% ownership in it. And what happens is I would get my payday. We're not doing the smaller quick hit paydays we haven't done that in a long time, just because we've graduated, into this industry. But what you could do is you could take some like a 10% ownership or whatever as a limited partner or whatever it may be. And then, after closing or at closing, you give up your ownership in the company in exchange for the your buyer taking title or whatever. I mean, there's a million ways to go about it, but I shouldn't say a million, but there's several. There's all kinds of language you can put in an assignment clause to give yourself some loopholes if you're very insistent on doing an assignment. But here again, I'm going to just drill this into you. As soon as you're in a position financially to not need the quick hits and the paydays right away, and that you're willing to wait for your payday to happen at like land use approval or construction drawing approval, that's where you're going to have some big hits. So that's my 2 cents on the assignment clause shutdown.
All right, good. Well, thanks for that, Cody. So guys, just keep that in mind that as you're putting together these assignment clauses, you can get creative and go back to that module. We talked about some different options you can do, but get creative. It's very rare that we get our assignment clause just completely shut down. So it probably won't happen that often with you, if ever. But when it does, just know that a simultaneous close, which is also from our previous module in this week, we know now that that's where we're going to see our biggest paydays. That actually isn't such a bad thing, and that you can absolutely, even with no assignment available to you, you can still get something simultaneously closed at closing and still get paid on it. So we just wanted to make sure we spent some time with you on this concept of assignment today, and to let you know that in the event where it is not possible, that not all hope is lost. And on the contrary, you'll be doing a simultaneous close, which will typically yield you a bigger payday. So it can be good news for you. All right, we'll end this short one here, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Hello, everyone. David Hill here, back again with Cody Bugan. And today in this module, we want to spend some time talking to you about what we would call unorthodox deals. And what I mean by this is that as you get rolling in this industry and as you build out your network, beyond just the raw land deals that you are primarily looking for, you will start having other types of deals come across your desk. As you meet people in the industry, for example, real estate agents, property owners, all types of, even title companies will send you leads on occasion. You might have some projects come across your desk that do not fit within what you are trying to accomplish, but you'll find that there are still some ways to be able to make some money off of these projects. So we're going to look at a few examples, and Cody, I'll have you start. Let's talk about some of these different types of projects that'll come across the desk. For example, oftentimes we'll have someone say, hey, I've got a project that is preliminarily approved. Are you guys interested in it? So what are some ways that, as a wholesaler, we can look at these projects and eventually possibly make some money off of them?
Well, first of all, the way that a lot of these deals come across our plate or our desk is it's because when people think of these deals, they think of us. And the reason they think of us is because we're networked. I mean, people know we're out there, they know what we're doing, they know that we're real, they know that we get deals done. So, yes, so we'll have deals come across our desk that are already have land use approval on them, or they might even already have construction drawing approval on them. And so that's not really our forte. That's not really what our company's built on. The core of our company, the core of our company is built on that we are very good at land acquisition. We're very good at putting deals together that otherwise are not on the open market or on the market period for sale. So, but that doesn't mean that when something comes across my desk that is outside kind of our core business, that we don't take a look at it, do a quick evaluation, and see if there's some opportunity here. Because we we are networked. We do know what people are out there looking for, what companies are looking for as far as buyers. And it might be that whoever's bringing me this deal doesn't know the people that I know or we know, and I have an opportunity that even though I'm not going to buy it at preliminary approval, I might go ahead and put it under contract, just like as if it was a raw land deal that we've been coaching y'all on. And then I'll turn around and do the same darn thing. I might go out and find a new buyer, create a spread, and do a simultaneous close. Or I might get an assignment clause in my contract of us buying it, and we assign the deal. So it's the same concept as that when you're out looking for raw land, you're just doing it with something that's already gone halfway or two-thirds through the process. It's the same model. It's just starting at a different point. So that would be how I would answer that question.
Yeah. So taking our example of a preliminarily approved project that comes across our desk, we might think, well, we run some numbers and say, okay, this price actually seems reasonable. And this is what you'll find a lot of times. Keep in mind on these projects, these types of things that come across your desk. A lot of people don't understand the art of or the concept of leaving meat on the bone. And this is really important even for you to understand as you are putting together your ninja deals. You have to be mindful that there's got to be meat left on the bone to be able to get these things done on the market. And sometimes the meat's already there. Sometimes you can create the meat through a story. You can run some numbers and take it to the right buyer who will see meat on that bone that another buyer might not have. And again, this comes down to your networking and knowing your buyers. But when someone brings something to me that's preliminary plat approved, I would say probably more often than not, and again, doesn't take me a lot of time to figure it out, but more often than not, they just haven't really left much meat on the bone. And then I can just sometimes I'll go back and I'll say, well, look, that number doesn't work, and here's a number that would, and we can try to put something together. But if the number does work, then the idea is you put it under contract, and like Cody said, you run it through the same paces. You have some buyers in mind that might have an interest in this project, and you take it to them, and then you simultaneously close it. And this can be on big projects, and this can be on small projects. I know, Cody, we did a deal about a year ago, just a single finished lot that we actually as a company were looking for at the time, and we got it under contract and decided at some point that we didn't want that lot anymore. And what did we do? Well, we went out and contacted some of the local builders in our network and found a builder that was interested in that lot. He made us an offer on it, and it just happened to be more than what we paid for what we were under contract to pay that for that lot. And so we did a simultaneous close and got a check. It wasn't anything big. I think it was, I don't remember, Cody, was it 30 or 40 grand, but it was still, something that came across our desk, and it wasn't something that it's not our core business, but we were able to put together a really quick little win on a small project.
Yeah, which was great, right? I mean, it's not really at all our business model, but it wasn't a ton of work, and we made, I think it was 40 grand, and I mean 40 grand's 40 grand. I don't care who you are, right? So
That's
I mean,
right.
if you can make a quick 40 grand on one lot, I mean, why not? Why not? So yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah. And maybe one last thing we'll end this one with, guys, is in kind of unorthodox deals. One thing that you can start to look to add to your business model are oftentimes what we call infill lots, or projects that maybe already have a home on them, but because of their zoning, there's a possibility to carve out one more lot on that property. And that is something that, again, they're small projects and they can be small little wins, but they don't take a lot of time. And it's just something you can add, for example, in your mailing list. Maybe you don't want to spend a ton of time making phone calls to these people, but add it to your mailing list. And you identify these, let's call it a property that's 40,000 square feet, and it's got a house maybe kind of nestled off in a corner, and it's zoned R20, so 20,000 square foot lot. So there's a good chance that you'll be able to carve out a single lot. And if you've got a network of local builders who they're maybe smaller builders and they look for those one-off lots, it could be a really quick little win for you to put an agreement together with that property owner, and that will allow you to basically subdivide that property, although it's more called a minor partition in this example, because a minor partition is subdivisions are a bit more in depth, as you know, and most jurisdictions will allow a minor partition when you're subdividing in under a certain amount of lots. So for example, we've used Happy Valley many times in the past, and Happy Valley, anything 4 lots and under, you can do a minor partition as opposed to a full-blown land use application. And just a few less hoops to jump through. The process is a little bit easier and a little bit less expensive. And so these parcels that you can divide off one lot on, they can be little home runs for you. So again, it's kind of an unorthodox deal, but it's something that you should keep in mind and consider adding to your arsenal of tools of the types of projects that you can put together and make some money on. So we will end it there. This is a little short one, but just want to keep this idea that unorthodox deals will come your way, and you don't need to just pass on them. You can actually look at different ways on making money on them. All right, guys. So we'll end it there, and we'll see you on the next one. Hello, everyone. David Hill here, back again with Cody Bugan, and we wanted to dedicate this module to something that we call land bank deals. So we're going to dive into what those are and how those can be structured. And the reason we are adding this module into this training course, we've up until now, we've been all about putting things together, putting deals together, and then getting them wholesaled. And land bank deals might not necessarily fall into that category, but we wanted to make sure that we spend some time on it, because you will have instances where you will maybe be contacted by a property owner through a mailing or someone you touch base with over the phone, and their property might not be in a position where you can actually put a deal together in the here and now. And that could be for several reasons. It could be, for example, that a property is inside of a future expansion area, and maybe it's a half mile away from city limits, but maybe it's a beautiful 20-acre piece. And you know that at some point down the road, because it is in a future expansion area, that it will get absorbed into the jurisdiction, and it will at some point have some great development value. It might not have it now, but it will in the future. And so we want to spend some time teaching you guys how to handle those types of deals where you come across a piece of property that isn't necessarily ready to develop now. Maybe sewer is 2 miles away. Maybe it is 4 parcels from city limits and you cannot annex it right now. Maybe it is in an expansion area and it doesn't even have zoning yet, but it's in the city's comprehensive plan area. So you know that once it's annexed, it will get a zoning that you're going to like. It's going to have some kind of residential zoning on it. What do you do with those deals? So we call those land bank deals. Cody, maybe you can give us some of your feedback on how you like to structure those.
So first, let me say that land banking can be extremely profitable, lucrative, generate some major wealth. But land banking, I need to make sure you understand, is basically a completely different business model than kind of the core of this Land Deals Revealed program. Land banking, as Dave shared with you, is basically pieces of property that you can't do anything with now. Okay, they can't be developed, but you see that the growth is heading that way. Utilities are heading that way, and you see, projects being put in. And so there's two basic ways to structure a land bank deal. One is a buy now price. So their property, just for lack of better terms, let's just call it farmland. Okay. So we're gonna say raw land that you can't do anything with is farmland. Okay. So basically it's farmland. I'm gonna pay them. I'm gonna use an illustration of a land bank deal we did, and it was 20 acres and couldn't be developed at the time. And we bought it for 500,000. So we paid 25,000 an acre. The development land in the area that's currently developing was selling for anywhere from 250 to 350 an acre. So we chose to go ahead and just buy it now, pay 500,000 for it, and sit on it. And when the time comes, which is actually going to be here probably in the next year or two, we'll start running it through the development process and are going to have tremendous amount of upside because our basis in the land is only 25 grand an acre. So that's a buy now land bank. And if you're going to buy now, you better be buying it for substantially less than what that land's worth once it's developable. Subject to, depending on how long you need to land bank it for, right? The longer you need to land bank it for, the less you should pay for it per acre, or, per lot, or however you'd like to look at it. The next option on a land bank deal is, they might want a lot more per acre than what it's actually worth today. They want something closer to what it's worth as developable land. In those scenarios, what we will do is we'll still try to get it for a little less than, hopefully, than what it will be worth as developable acreage. But instead of closing on it now, because if we go back to our basic illustration of if you're going to pay for a diamond, you got to make sure it's a diamond, is that development valued land isn't actually worth those values until you get the approvals on it. Therefore, these people are wanting a lot more for their property than what it's actually worth today. So what we'll put together is a long-term purchase agreement or option agreement, whatever you'd like to call it. And what we will do is we will pay them so much money a year as earnest money that's applied to the purchase price. But a lot of times we'll release that earnest money and we'll take security against the property. And what it allows these people to do is use that released money towards whatever expenses or things they got going on in their life. So let's say it's a deal that I might not develop for 7 to 10 years. I can think of a particular instance where a family, they didn't have enough money in place to be able to retire. And so what I did with that particular, I'll tell you what that deal was. That deal was 10 years out. The closest developable land was here again, selling for about 300 grand an acre. Actually, about 400 grand an acre. What I did with those people is we agreed to a price of, and the land was worth as is, maybe 20 grand an acre. Okay. What we did with those people is we agreed to pay them 150,000 an acre. So we basically split the difference between what it was worth today and what it would be worth if it was developable today. We split the difference, paid them 150 grand an acre, and I was paying them $50,000 a year that was applied to the purchase price and released, and it was the additional money they needed to start their retired lifestyle. So those are two completely different illustrations of two different land bank deals we've done, but both considered land banking.
Yeah, the idea here is either you can buy it now and hold it yourself, and you're taking on the risk. How long will it take before I can develop it? Nobody knows. You can never know for sure. But me buying it now, I get to take that risk on. So with that risk, I need a reward, and my reward is I'm buying that property at a much lower price. I'm buying it much closer to what it's actually worth in terms of raw land as is today.
Yeah.
The other
and here's
option,
a gauge. But before you get into the other option, the gauge is, as Dave goes into the second illustration. So those people that I was paying 50,000 a year to, I was buying the land for, split the difference, right? So I'm meeting the middle number where I was paying about half what it'll actually be worth when it's developable, but I was paying a whole lot more than it was worth today. And so when you're trying to figure out, well, how much do I give them a year, and what should the price be per acre? Well, you need to get to know your seller and what's important to them.
yeah,
Is the price per acre most important, or is the money per year most important? And the higher the price per acre, the lower the money should be per year. Okay, so let's say that those people are like, no, Cody, we have to have 300,000 an acre for this property. I would have said, okay, so I'll do that. But now instead of it being 50,000 a year, I'm only going to give you 10,000 a year. So, and that's all just numbers and you gauging where you need to be to get the deal done. But just the more they want per acre, the less the money is per year.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And in that example, you're paying less money, you're paying a smaller amount per year, and you are taking on less risk, right? So the more risk, you take on more risk when you buy the property up front and you just become the owner, and then you're sitting and waiting, and you're going to pay less per acre. If they want more per acre, then you need to figure out a way to alleviate your risk. And that is by not taking ownership of it and just paying a smaller portion per year. And we use this word option. Some people will call it an option payment, meaning that when this thing becomes developable, I will have the option of buying it at this preset price that we've agreed on. But if something goes south or you decide to have a whatever a shift into a different market entirely, you can always walk from that deal, and the only thing you will have risked losing is this relatively small amount of money that you're paying per year. So it just comes down to risk and reward. Whoever's willing to take which risk and wants what reward, and it'll pan itself out. But those are two ways that you can put together land deals on properties that aren't necessarily ready to go today. And they might be 2 years out, they might be 10 years out, they might be 15 years out, but you're still able to put these deals together. And like Cody said at the very beginning, they're just a great way in long-term thinking to have a piece of property that when it does become developable, you will be in a great position with that property, and it'll be a great potential for a big home run for you. So we will end this one here. Just wanted to make sure you were aware of the land bank deal concept. All right, guys, we'll catch you in the next one. Take care.
Take care.
All right. Easements. So today I want to talk to you about easements, and we're going to look at an example here, but we'll also talk about some other examples. All right. I thought this project would be a good one to look at in terms of this easement example. So with easements, a couple things to note here. One is the cost of an easement. Is it given freely or is it purchased? The duration of an easement, is it a permanent easement for all time or is it a temporary easement? The benefits of an easement to both the person receiving the easement and the person giving the easement. All of these things will come into play when we talk about easements. And when we're negotiating them, these are certain things that we'll look at. So first of all, let's just start by, just so it'll be easier to move on. When we talk about who gives an easement, we're going to call him the grantor. And the person that receives the benefit of the easement is the grantee. So we'll just start using that moving forward. So the person that gives the easement is the grantor. The person who benefits from the easement is the grantee. Okay, so when we're looking at an easement, let's just look at this project, for example. So this is a deal, and I'm just going to kind of outline it with my mouse here. It kind of runs like this. And this is a deal we're working on right now. We've got it under contract. And we need an easement on this project. And I'm going to scroll in here. And you can kind of see here, there's this natural kind of, you see some greener areas here. And then you've got this kind of this ditch right here. And it runs down into, here we go, this Bullfrog Reservoir. It's basically just a glorified pond, but I don't know why they call it a reservoir. But in our project, we are going to be putting this is kind of the low point of the project, and we're putting a stormwater pond here. And in designing this stormwater pond, we have it a certain size to match the total number of lots that we're putting in this project. So we're planning on putting in, I think it's about 100 lots on this project. And so our stormwater detention pond is right here, and it is sized to be able to accommodate 100 lots. Well, it is and it isn't, and we'll get into that. But before I do, just let me remind you, so a stormwater pond, it's basic, at a basic level, its purpose is to keep water that flows from this property onto this property, to keep it at the same level as the water has historically flowed through its natural state. So meaning that when it rains, water hits this area and it's collected by the ground, it runs to the ground. This is the low point, so everything kind of moves that direction, and then it flows onto the neighbor's property and then eventually hits this reservoir, this pond, and then it moves on from there. Well, when we build a subdivision, we are going to be putting in a lot of what's called impervious surfaces, meaning that surfaces that do not absorb water. They they take water and the water runs off it at a much quicker pace. So those surfaces can be roads. Roads are a great example. Rooftops. Rooftops do not absorb water, obviously. The water hits it and they run off and it runs down the gutters and then into the stormwater system. But by adding all these impervious surfaces to this project, what we're creating is water flow that's flowing at a much faster pace than the property did in its natural state. Meaning that without these surfaces, the water hits this ground and the ground acts as this filter that slows down the water flow as it heads here, in this case, to the east by gravity. So the impervious surfaces, they create the situation whereby water flows at a much higher rate. And so if you don't have a system to control that, what would happen is that you would end up flooding your neighbor's property because this water would start flowing at a much faster rate and would all end up down here and it would flood into your neighbor's property and it'd just be turn into a big mess. So the stormwater pond is in place for that purpose. Now, stormwater ponds are not the only answer to that issue. There are other ways that you can control water. There are underground ways, underground filtration systems. Different parts of the US may or may not have water ponds. In more arid places, maybe they wouldn't have it because you're just not seeing a lot of rain. But in any case, here in Oregon, it's a very common thing. I think in a lot of parts of the US, these are very common. And what the storm pond detention or the storm pond, what it does is it basically acts as a catch for this quicker moving water. It collects that water, and then through its own filtration system, it releases it back into the ground. And the idea is that you release it at the same rate as the ground was releasing it before you improved the project. So that's what it does. Now, in this situation, because we want to hit 100 lots on our project, and that just comes down to the numbers, the stormwater pond that we're building is a little bit smaller than it needs to be, or maybe that it should be. And so because of that, the stormwater pond isn't able to release water at the rate that it should. And because of that, we need to be able to get an easement here. Now, this easement it's a stormwater release easement, and I've actually got a PDF of it here. And so you can see it's basically just a pipe that runs underground and then it surfaces over here. But because of the size of the stormwater facility that we've got here, we need an easement to be able to run that here to this point, and then it gets released naturally. So let's talk about the benefits of an easement. When you're approaching a property owner, a neighboring property owner, and you need an easement, the first question you have to ask yourself is, okay, does this easement provide any benefit to this property owner? Because if it does, it's going to give you a much better chance of actually obtaining that easement. And there are a lot of ways your project can be a benefit to your neighbor. For example, here, you'll see we are stubbing 2 streets into this neighbor's property. And that is a huge benefit to the neighbor because, as you can see, the current situation is this property here is landlocked. There are no streets stubbed into this property. So if this property owner wanted to develop his dirt, he wouldn't be able to do it because he's got no access. There are no public roads. So by developing our project, I think actually we're bringing in 3 stubs. We're bringing one up here where we saw it on our diagram, one about here. I think we've got another one a bit further down here. So we're bringing in 3 public roads stubbing into his property. Along with those roads, we are bringing in utilities. We are going to be extending utilities into this project. And so we'll be providing this property with not only access, but also utilities. And so that is a huge benefit to this property owner. And in this case, this property owner sees that benefit and gave us that easement for that stormwater line. All right, now let's talk about permanent and temporary easements. So the easement agreement that we're putting together for this area here it is a permanent easement. Now, that does not necessarily mean that this pipe will be here for all of time. In fact, when this project gets built out in the future and this road gets extended and the storm system is incorporated into this project here, well, we won't need this anymore. And so on paper, it's called a permanent easement, but in reality, if ever this property develops, this will more likely than not go away. And so that is another kind of selling point for the property owner, is that yes, it in language on paper, it's called a permanent easement, but that easement won't necessarily be there for all of time. When you, Mr. Property Owner, sell your property and the property is developed, they will build a road right through there. They will manage their own storm system. It'll tie in with our storm system, and that easement will go away. So it's not going to affect the value of your property in terms of future development. Now, temporary easements come into play. Let's go back to this aerial here, and let's imagine a different scenario. Let's imagine that, you know, this ground here is fairly flat, but let's imagine that it wasn't. Let's imagine that we had a low point over here, and the ground slowly rose as we head east and continued to rise into the neighbor's property. Well, maybe in doing our project, we're bringing in a road that we need to level out more than what the ground currently is. And so we need to do what's called cuts and fills, and we're going to reshape this ground. We're going to dig out, maybe let's say the road's right here. We're going to dig out this area of the road. And so by the time the road hits this boundary on the west side, I think I might have said east earlier, but yes, that is west. By the time that road hits this boundary on the west side, it will be at a lower point than this unimproved ground here. So it'll stub out here, but because we've sunk the ground here, maybe to meet our slope requirements for this road, we're going to have this situation where we're going to have a rise. It's going to be, it's because it's sunk down, it's going to be a rise up to the neighbor's property. And maybe we need to build a retaining wall there. A retaining wall that is temporary in nature, meaning that at some point when this property owner sells and this road is extended into this property, that retaining wall will go away. Well, this retaining wall is built along the boundary, and it's very difficult to build a retaining wall without encroaching onto the neighbor's property to some extent. I mean, you've got machines out there, you're building these giant blocks, you're stacking them on top of each other. I mean, there's different ways to build retaining walls, but typically you're building these blocks, and to do that, you've got to have machines, you've got to have grading. And so you need the ability to actually come on to the neighbor's property in order to build this retaining wall. And what we refer to those oftentimes are construction easements. So they're easements that the neighboring property owner would give us the right to actually bring machines onto his property in order to enable us to build this retaining wall. And construction easements are almost always temporary, so they would be temporary construction easements. Now, getting that easement from your property owner, and this will come down again to, are there any benefits to the property owner? Here again, you've got a road you're stubbing into the property owner's property, and so if you need an easement, a temporary easement to build a retaining wall, I would say that your chances are pretty good at getting that easement. But here's the thing with easement, guys. Even if you are bringing utilities in, even if you're bringing streets in, and you're providing a huge benefit to the property owner, that does not mean that he is just going to freely give you an easement. In fact, sometimes it could just be, it's just not going to happen. And here's what that can come down to. Maybe this property owner has no intention to develop. Maybe this property owner does not want to see a development next to his property. And knowing that you need an easement, he could leverage that and just say, nope, I'm not going to give it to you, and the project doesn't work. Now, if he doesn't give, let's go back to our wall agreement or our wall scenario. If the property owner doesn't give me the easement, well, that just means that I'm going to have to do some fancier engineering, because there are retaining walls that can be built right up against a property line that don't require machines to encroach on the neighboring property. The thing is that they're just much more complicated, they're much more expensive, and they eat up more dirt, meaning that they will come into your property a bit further. But it can be done at a cost. So keep that in mind. Sometimes an easement that you need is not maybe necessarily one that you need, but it's one that you want because it makes your life easier. It makes your project less expensive. Going back to our stormwater easement earlier, if we couldn't get this easement, our fallback plan would have been we would have had to build this stormwater facility bigger, a bigger footprint, and we would have lost 2 lots. And so we'll talk about value a little bit later, how to value an easement. But you can see here, right there, building the stormwater facility out bigger, we're going to lose 2 lots. So you can guess as to how we're going to put a value on this easement right here. But we'll come back to that later. So back to this idea of getting the easement or not. If you can't get an easement, it doesn't necessarily mean that the project is dead in the water. It just means that you might have to get more creative and figure out another way to do it, and that other way will often cost more money. There can be situations where it just isn't possible. Without an easement, your project isn't possible. But more often than not, you can find some kind of solution. So going back to your property owner, he may just say, no, I'm not going to give you an easement, just not going to happen. And it might not be for any logical reason. It just could because he just doesn't want to give one. It could be because he wants to try and thwart your project. He doesn't want to see development come his way. It could be many reasons. The next scenario could be he's not opposed to giving you the easement, but keep this in mind, guys. Anytime you talk to a property owner about an easement, they instantly start seeing dollar signs. Most property owners think that developers have bottomless pockets. They've got tons of cash, and they just see a big payday when a developer comes to them saying that he needs an easement. So how you communicate the need for that easement comes into play. You know how you leverage it, how you present it, the benefits that it gives the property owner. All those come into play. But at the end of the day, you could very well come to a situation where the property owner says, "Yep, I'll give you an easement, but I'm not going to give it to you for free." And in those situations, then it just becomes a question. Okay, well, how much does he want, and does it make sense financially? Meaning that if I can find an alternative to and not need this easement, what's that alternative going to cost me? Let's go back to our diagram here. Well, in this situation, we can't get this easement, so it's going to cost us 2 lots. And so then it just becomes a question of, okay, well, how much are these 2 lots worth? And let's say that to us, they're worth 30 grand a lot. So that puts a price. We can pay up to 60 grand for this easement before it doesn't make sense anymore, and we just grow out our pond and lose these 2 lots. And so that's our range. Anywhere from 0 to 60 grand is what we can pay for this easement. Now, that's obviously not something we're going to take to the seller. Obviously, negotiation 101, always get the other side to talk first. And so if the seller says, I can give you this easement, but I'm going to need to get paid for it. And oftentimes their exact words are, I'll give you the easement, but how much will you pay me for it? Well, your next question is going to be, well, we weren't necessarily thinking about paying you for it. I mean, this project's going to be a great benefit to yours. It's going to give you this, and that, utilities, road stubs. It's going to bring great value to your property. We weren't planning on paying you for it. If we were to pay you an amount, what would that need to be? And you kind of put it back, and then you just launch into your negotiations. But in your back pocket, in this situation, in this example, you can go up to 60 grand. And maybe it's a thing where you go up to 50 grand, and at that point, you just say, you know what, I'm just going to build my stormwater pond and walk away from the easement negotiations. But that's your number, 60 grand. Now, when you're negotiating these things, yeah, it just comes down to maybe your neighbor will get to the point and he's like, nope, give me $1 million and I'll give you this easement. And it's like, okay, that's not going to happen, and I'll just figure out another way. And this can be part of your negotiation as well. If your property owner knows that you don't necessarily need their easement,
that can be put leverage back in your camp, meaning that if it's dollar signs they want, then they will be maybe more ready to negotiate. But if they, on the same token, if the property owner knows that you don't necessarily need the easement and they just don't want to give it to you, they might just say no. And even if you offer to pay them, they might say no because they know that you can do it either way. So it just really comes down to getting a feel for the property owner, getting a feel for their thoughts on the value of what you're bringing to the table in terms of your proposed subdivision, and then a feel for what this easement is worth to you as the the land acquisition expert, land acquisition specialist. So those are easements. They are sometimes permanent. They are sometimes temporary. Sometimes they can be a benefit to the property owner. Sometimes there can be no real tangible benefit, so it's hard to sell them at that point. You just need to negotiate. Typically, you're just negotiating what you can pay for it. So easements can cost money. Sometimes you can get them for free. It just all depends on your negotiation and what that easement represents to your property owner. Access easements, stormwater easements, construction easements in order to build something needed on your property, but you need to go on to the property owner's property for on a temporary basis just to be able to construct it. These are all different types of easements that you might see that come into play. But I just wanted to spend some time today talking about easements and just kind of going more into depth on what they are and how to negotiate them and what they'll look like in real world. So we looked at a couple examples here: the stormwater easement, the retention wall easement. You'll see other types. I mean, there's many different types out there, but it just comes down to does it benefit the grantor? Can you sell them on the benefits? B, is he seeing dollar signs? If so, you're going to have to pay. Or C, he just doesn't want to have to happen at all. No easements are going to be given, and you're going to have to find another way. And we've had a situation in the past where we had a need for a retaining wall. Obviously not this project, but just to go back to a visual, we've had a need for a retaining wall. The property owner was very stubborn and did not want us to build our subdivision. And so we had to end up doing a more engineered retaining wall. It just added more money to the project and just took out from our bottom line. So that's the real world, guys, and easements are a very big part of it. And so hopefully that gives you some clarification.
Hello, everyone. David Hill here, and I've got with me my trusty sidekick partner, Cody Bugan. Say hello, Cody.
Hey, everyone.
And we wanted to take just a few minutes, so this will be a short one for you, but we wanted to talk to you a little bit about market shifts in the market, and how that will play out with you as you get started in your new career as a property land wholesaler. So, Cody, let's talk about market shifts and how we can adapt and what kind of effect that will have on us.
So here's the beauty of a wholesaler, or as someone that's not going to actually buy these properties and develop them and sell finished lots or sell houses or whatever it may be. As a wholesaler, you can move and shake and shift, and you have tons of flexibility with very, very little exposure at all to the actual market conditions. So because of that, whether the market is going up, down, it's flat, whatever the market's doing, you just got to make sure you're in tune with the market, and whatever buys you're making, whatever deals you're negotiating, you just make sure you always are making, or you're always handling those negotiations within the market conditions that exist. And as long as you do that, as a wholesaler, you should be able to make money no matter what conditions the market are in. Because, I mean, it's very simple. What you're doing, you just keep it relative to the marketplace. So that's why, as a wholesaler, if you're educated and you're in tune and you are well networked, you can make the deals you're putting together always relative to the market. Because the reality is, a lot of these developers and builders, they got to continue to make a living. They got to continue to build houses. It's just that it's having to reset at where they got to deliver a home, price at, or a lot price, so on and so forth. So, but whether the price is 100 grand an acre or 500 an acre or 300 grand an acre, depending on what the market's doing, you structure your deals accordingly, and you should be able to make money as a land deals wholesaler, no matter what market you're in.
Yeah, so guys, the idea here is that you should be able to continue with what we're teaching you in this module. This will be a tool that you can use in any market, in any environment. And the market obviously is going to shift back and forth over the coming years, as it always has and always will. But the beauty of the wholesaler in this land market is that you can pivot and shift with it, and that you'll be able to still put deals together, whether the market is riding on a high or riding on a low or just some even keeled flat period. And as Cody said, the key here is just, and this will become second nature for you as you get more and more into this, is you need to be in tune with what the market's doing. And inevitably, as you work in it, you won't be able to do anything else but be in tune with it, because the market's conditions will force themselves on you as they do with everyone else, and you will find that you'll just be up to date on what's going on almost naturally. So keep that in mind. It's a great position to be in as a wholesaler in the land development industry, in that you can continue to put together deals even when things swing one way or the other. So we'll end that module here. Thanks for joining us on this one, and we'll catch you in the next one.